Glad you're here. Tonight we're diving deep into the mysterious world of Hollow Knight, exploring every corner of this fallen kingdom and uncovering the secrets of the Pale King, the Radiance, and the tiny knight who would change everything. Comment below to let us know where you're watching from, and if this helps you sleep today, make sure to like and subscribe tomorrow when you wake up. Now, get comfortable, relax, and let's begin this journey into the depths of Hallow Nest. Long before the kingdom of Hallow Nest existed, the land looked very different from what we know today. It was a wild place, split between different tribes of bugs and creatures, each living in their own way. The moths had their territory, worshipping a being of pure light called the Radiance. In what would later become Greenpath, plant-like bugs worshipped another higher being named Un, a massive slug who existed in dreams. The Mantis tribe had their own lands, proud warriors who kept to themselves. There were mushroom creatures who formed their own communities, and spiders who lurked in the deepest, darkest places. None of these bugs had what we might call free will or true intelligence. They lived by instinct, following the patterns set by their gods and their nature. Everything changed when a massive creature called a worm arrived in the land. Worms were ancient beings, enormous serpent-like creatures that could burrow through mountains and reshape the world itself. These beings had powers beyond what normal bugs could imagine. They could pull other creatures into their thrall, basically controlling them or influencing them in powerful ways. Worms also had a special gift called foresight, which meant they could see glimpses of the future and predict what might happen. This particular worm travelled across wastelands and through mountains until it finally stopped at a place that would later be known as Kingdom's Edge. When the worm reached Kingdom's Edge, something incredible happened. The worm didn't want to remain as this massive, terrifying creature. It wanted to live among the bugs, to build something greater. So the worm did something that had never been done before. It died, or at least its body died. The worm shed its massive shell and transformed into something new. From the death of the worm came the birth of a new being, one that looked much more like the bugs that lived in the land. This new being was smaller, more refined, with a pale white body and a crown made from what used to be the worm's teeth. This was the Pale King. You can still find the cast-off shell of the worm in Kingdom's Edge if you look carefully. It's enormous, this dead husk of what the Pale King used to be. Inside the very end of this shell, there's a broken pale egg, a hint of the rebirth that happened there. The area around Kingdom's Edge is covered in ash that falls like snow, and this ash actually comes from the decaying body of the old worm. It's a reminder of what the Pale King sacrificed to become what he was. The Pale King had grand plans for this land. He wanted to create a kingdom, a civilization unlike anything that had existed before. But to do this, he needed to give the bugs something they didn't have. He needed to give them minds that could think, wills of their own, and the intelligence to build and create. The Pale King had this power, this pale light that could expand the minds of bugs and grant them sapience. He began to approach the different tribes, offering them this gift in exchange for their devotion to him and his kingdom. The moths were among the first to encounter the Pale King's light. Before this, they had worshipped the Radiance, their creator, a being of brilliant light who had given birth to them. The moth tribe was peaceful by nature. They rarely took up weapons and preferred to spend their time working with dreams and honouring the dead. But when the Pale King arrived with his pale light, something happened. His light was different from the Radiance's light. It was stronger in some ways, more immediate. The moths made a choice that would have enormous consequences. They turned their backs on the Radiance and began to worship the Pale King instead. This was a betrayal that the Radiance would never forget. As the moths devoted themselves to the Pale King, their memories of the Radiance began to fade. Over time, they forgot about her entirely. The Radiance, this ancient being of light and dreams, was sealed away in the dream realm, forgotten by the very creature she had created. She was trapped there, unable to manifest in the physical world, unable to be remembered, and she was furious. The Pale King continued building his kingdom. Different tribes reacted to him in different ways. The Mantis tribe, proud and fierce warriors, refused to bow to the Pale King. They wanted to keep their own territory and their own way of life. But the Pale King was wise enough not to force them. Instead, he made a deal with the Mantises. They could keep their lands and maintain their own society, but in exchange they would protect Hallownest from the dangerous creatures that lived in Deepnest, the spider territory below. The Mantises agreed to this arrangement, and they kept their word for a very long time. The mushroom creatures in the fungal wastes accepted the Pale King's rule, but they weren't entirely confident in him. According to tablets found in their territory, they put their faith in the Pale King's foresight, his ability to see the future and protect them from dangers to come. This ability to predict the future was something the Pale King had inherited from his time as a worm. The bees decided they wanted nothing to do with any of this. They sealed off their hive at Kingdom's Edge, allowing only patrol bees to enter and exit. The queen of the hive eventually grew so large that she couldn't leave even if she wanted to. The bees basically said they would handle their own business and wanted to be left alone. Un, the slug creature in Greenpath, seems to have kept some territory, but allowed the Pale King to reduce the size of Greenpath. The Mosskin, the plant-like bugs born from Yun's dreams, continued to worship their slug deity, even as the kingdom of Hallownest grew around them. The spiders in Deepnest completely rejected the Pale King. They never joined Hallownest. Deepnest remained a wild, dangerous place full of creatures that would kill any bug that wandered in. The spider tribe and their queen, Hera the Beast, kept to their own ways in the darkness below, with most of the tribes either joining him or making peace with him. The Pale King began to build his kingdom in earnest. He established the capital city, the City of Tears, a beautiful place with elegant architecture. He built the White Palace, a gleaming structure that would serve as his home and the seat of his power. The palace was built with impossible precision, filled with buzzsaws and spikes and deadly traps, though these might have been added later for reasons we'll get to. The Pale King also created the Stagways, a system of tunnels that giant stag beetles could travel through, allowing bugs to move quickly across the kingdom. He built trams and infrastructure. He gave his kingdom laws and order. The bugs of Hallownest began to truly worship the Pale King. They created king's idols in his image. They believed that he had created their entire world and everything in it. They thought that their ability to think and feel and create came from him, and in a way, they were right. The Pale King promised them that Hallownest would last forever, an eternal kingdom that would never fall. The bugs had never known anything like this before. They had gone from living by instinct to building a civilization. They had art and culture and purpose. The Pale King had a partner in all of this, someone who had become his queen. She was called the White Lady, and she was a higher being just like the Pale King, but of a different kind. She was a root being, connected to plants and nature in deep ways. The White Lady made her home in what became known as the Queen's Gardens, a beautiful area that had once belonged to the Mosskin but that she claimed for herself. The Pale King and the White Lady ruled together, and Hallownest flourished under their reign. The Pale King also established the 5 Great Knights, legendary warriors who served him directly. There was Dryer, who became the protector of the White Lady and stood guard over the Queen's Gardens. There was Isma, who had the power to create a special acid-resistant substance. There was Zima, a warrior from distant lands outside Hallownest. There was Hegemol, a mighty knight whose armour was so impressive that it would later be stolen. And there was Ogrim, who would become known as the Dung Defender, the last of the 5 great knights to remain loyal even after the kingdom fell. For a while, everything was perfect. Hallownest was a thriving kingdom. Bugs worked and created and lived their lives. The City of Tears became a centre of culture and learning. Scholars studied soul, the life force that flows through all living things. In an area called the Soul Sanctum, Bugs experimented with soul, trying to unlock its secrets and even attempting to achieve immortality. The Pale King eventually disapproved of these experiments and cast out the Soul Master who led them, but that's another story. Deep below the kingdom, in the darkest depths, there was a place called the Abyss. The Abyss was home to something called the Void, a mysterious substance that seemed to be alive but also completely empty. The Void was like living darkness, existing in opposition to light. It was ancient, possibly older than anything else in the world. The Abyss was filled with it, a literal sea of this black substance that would consume anything that fell into it. The Pale King knew about the Abyss. He had studied the Void. He understood that it was powerful and dangerous, but also potentially useful. For now, though, he didn't need it. Hallownest was safe and prosperous. The kingdom seemed like it would truly last forever, just as he had promised. But the Radiance had not forgotten. She was still sealed away in the dream realm, still furious about being abandoned by her own creations. And she discovered that she wasn't entirely powerless. Some bugs still had lingering memories of her, tiny fragments buried deep in their minds. These memories were like cracks that the Radiance could work through. She began to appear in the dreams of Hallownest's bugs. At first it was just dreams, strange visions of light and an ancient moth-like being. But the Radiance's influence grew stronger. The dreams turned into something worse. The bugs who dreamed of the Radiance began to change. Their eyes started to glow with an orange light. Their behaviour became erratic and violent. They were being forced to remember the Radiance, and it was breaking their minds. This was the beginning of the infection, though nobody understood what was happening at first. The infection spread slowly at first, but it was relentless. Infected bugs lost their intelligence and their free will. They reverted to something like their primal state, but worse. They became aggressive and mindless, attacking anything that moved. Their bodies began to leak with orange fluid, the physical manifestation of the infection. The kingdom of Hallownest tried everything to stop the infection. They performed rituals and said prayers. They tried to quarantine infected areas. The City of Tears closed its gates to try to keep the infection out. The 5 great knights fought valiantly against the infected bugs. But how do you fight an enemy that spreads through dreams? How do you kill something that has no physical form? The infection was caused by the Radiance, a being that existed in the dream realm, and no amount of swords or bravery could reach her there. The Pale King watched his kingdom begin to crumble. Everything he had built, all his promises of eternity, were falling apart. He used his foresight to try to find a solution. He looked into possible futures, searching for any way to save Hallownest, and he found an answer, though it was a terrible one. The Radiance couldn't be killed because she was a being of dreams and light, but perhaps she could be sealed away, trapped somewhere she couldn't escape. She needed to be contained within something that could hold her forever. The Pale King realized he needed to create a vessel, a being that could contain the Radiance inside itself. This vessel would need to be completely empty, hollow of all thought and feeling. It couldn't have any will of its own because the Radiance could exploit any weakness. It needed to be pure in its emptiness, and the Pale King knew exactly what he needed to create such a being. He needed to use the void. The Pale King and the White Lady began a process that would haunt them forever. They decided to have children, but these would not be normal children. They would take their eggs down into the abyss, into the presence of the void itself. The void would fill these eggs, flowing into the shells of their unborn children. The hope was that the void, being the opposite of light and completely empty of thought or feeling, would create beings that were truly hollow. The eggs were left in the abyss, in a place that would later be called the birthplace. As the eggs hatched, the void entered the young bugs, filling them. These creatures became known as vessels. They had bodies like small bugs, with black shells and white masks for faces. Inside their shells was pure void, darkness given form. The vessels had no gender, no voice, no will of their own. They were designed to be empty, but creating a truly pure vessel proved to be almost impossible. The Pale King and the White Lady made thousands of attempts. Thousands of vessels were created in the abyss. Most of them were deemed failures, not hollow enough, still containing some fragment of thought or will. These failed vessels were left in the abyss, abandoned. Their shells littered the floor of that dark place, thousands of tiny bodies discarded like trash. It was a horrible price to pay, sacrificing so many children, but the Pale King believed it was necessary. He had a saying that summed up his philosophy about all this: no cost too great. The vessels that were left behind in the abyss didn't truly die. Because they were made of void, they continued to exist in a way. They became shades, shadow versions of themselves wandering the darkness. Some of the vessels that were still alive climbed desperately, trying to escape the abyss. Most failed and fell back down, but a few made it out before the Pale King sealed the place. These escaped vessels scattered into the world, and we'll hear about some of them later. Finally, after countless failures, one vessel climbed out of the abyss and stood before the Pale King. This vessel seemed perfect. It showed no emotion, made no sound, appeared to have no thoughts or desires. The Pale King believed he had finally found his pure vessel. This vessel was chosen and taken away from the abyss. It was brought to the White Palace, where the Pale King would raise it and train it. This chosen vessel was given a name, the Hallow Knight. The Pale King sealed the abyss after this, locking it away with a seal that could only be broken by someone bearing the king's brand. He wanted to make sure that no one would ever enter that place of horror again. A lore tablet near the abyss reads, "Our pure vessel has ascended. Beyond lies only the refuse and regret of its creation. We shall enter that place no longer." The Hallow Knight was raised in the White Palace. It was trained in combat, taught to wield a nail, a weapon like a sword that bugs use. The Hollow Knight grew tall and strong. The Pale King watched over this vessel constantly, preparing it for its terrible purpose. And here's where the Pale King made his crucial mistake, though he might not have realized it at the time. He spent so much time with the Hollow Knight. He trained it, watched it grow, perhaps even felt something like pride or affection for it. The Hollow Knight was supposed to be completely hollow, but the Pale King had created a bond between them. There's a secret area in the game called the Path of Pain, one of the most difficult platforming challenges players can face. At the end of this brutal path, there's a hidden memory, a scene from the past. In this memory, we see the Pale King and the Hollow Knight together. The Hollow Knight is standing at attention, perfectly still. But then it does something. It turns its head, just slightly, and looks at the Pale King. And the Pale King looks back. It's a tiny moment, but it means everything. The Hollow Knight wasn't perfectly hollow after all. It had developed an idea, a thought, perhaps even a feeling. The White Lady would later refer to this as an idea instilled. The Hollow Knight had formed a bond with its father, and that tiny imperfection would eventually doom the kingdom. But the Pale King either didn't notice or chose to believe it didn't matter. He moved forward with his plan. To seal the radiance inside the Hollow Knight, the Pale King needed to create a prison that could hold them both. He built the Temple of the Black Egg, an enormous structure in the Forgotten Crossroads. The temple was made of void-like material, incredibly strong and impenetrable. Inside was a massive egg, also black, where the Hollow Knight would be chained. The Pale King needed one more thing to make the seal complete. He needed 3 individuals to become dreamers, beings who would use their eternal sleep to keep the seal on the temple closed. These dreamers would act as magical locks on the door. As long as they slept, the door would remain sealed, and the Hollow Knight would remain trapped inside with the radiance. The Pale King approached 3 bugs and asked them to make this enormous sacrifice. The first was a teacher named Monomon the Teacher. She was one of the greatest minds in Hallownest, a scholar who ran the archives. She agreed to become a dreamer, giving up her life to sleep forever for the good of the kingdom. The second was Lurien the Watcher. He lived in a tower high above the City of Tears, watching over the city he loved. He was completely devoted to the Pale King, and agreed without hesitation to become a dreamer. He took his place in his tower, sealed himself away with his butler, and went to sleep forever, watching over the City of Tears even in his dreams. The third dreamer was different. Hera the Beast, the Queen of Deepnest, had never joined Hallownest. She had no loyalty to the Pale King. But the Pale King needed her, and he made a deal. Hera agreed to become a dreamer, but she demanded something in return. She wanted a child, an heir. The Pale King agreed to this bargain. He and Hera had a child together. This child was born differently than the vessels. She was not filled with void. She had a gender, a will, a mind of her own. This child was named Hornet. After Hornet was born, Hera kept her end of the bargain and became the third dreamer, going to sleep in her den in Deepnest. So the Pale King now had his vessel and his dreamers. The time had come to seal the radiance away. The Hollow Knight fulfilled its purpose. It contained the radiance inside itself, trapping her within its void-filled shell. The Hollow Knight was then chained inside the Black Egg, and the 3 dreamers sealed the door with their sleeping power. The infection stopped. The orange glow faded from Bug's eyes. Hallownest was saved. For a while, everything seemed to return to normal. The kingdom began to recover. The Pale King had succeeded, or so it seemed. But he had his doubts. His foresight told him that this solution might not be permanent. He knew about the flaw in the Hollow Knight, the idea that had been instilled. He began to create more vessels just in case. He made dozens, maybe hundreds more, preparing for a future where he might need to replace the Hollow Knight. But that future never came, not for him at least. Time passed, and slowly, terribly, the seal began to fail. The Radiance was still conscious inside the Hollow Knight. She could feel the tiny weakness in her prison, that little bit of thought and feeling that shouldn't have been there. She began to work on it, exploiting it, growing stronger. The Hollow Knight was trying desperately to contain her, but it was fighting a losing battle. The infection started to leak out again. At some point during all this, the Pale King disappeared. The White Palace vanished from the physical world. Some say the Pale King hid it in the dream realm, protecting it with powerful magic and deadly traps, those buzzsaws and spikes that fill the palace. Others think he might have died, unable to face what he had done or to watch his kingdom fall despite all his sacrifices. The White Lady retreated to her gardens and bound herself inside a cocoon, stopping herself from creating any more offspring. She was ashamed of what she had done, of all the vessels she had created and abandoned. The kingdom of Hallownest slowly fell into ruin. The infection spread again, this time with no one to stop it. More and more bugs became infected, their eyes glowing orange, their minds gone. The City of Tears closed its gates permanently, but even that couldn't keep the infection out. The great houses fell. The scholars died or went mad. The Soul Master in the Soul Sanctum became obsessed with achieving immortality and infected himself in his experiments, becoming a monster. The 5 great knights scattered or died. Drea was killed outside the Queen's gardens, fighting against traitor mantises who had become infected. Her body remained there, a corpse standing guard long after death. Isma disappeared, though her grove remained. Hegemal's armour was stolen by a creature that would use it to pretend to be a great knight. Zima vanished, though her grave and memorial remained. Only Ogrim, the Dung Defender, remained in the waterways beneath the city, still loyal, still waiting, still believing his king would return someday. The Mantis tribe faced a crisis. Some mantises fell to the infection and became traitors, breaking the tribe's sacred code. The 3 Mantis lords had to fight their own infected sisters and seal them away in Deep Nest. The tribe survived, but became even more isolated, refusing to let anyone pass through their territory. In Greenpath, Un fell into a deep sleep. The Mosskin continued to worship their sleeping deity, but they became more primal, attacking outsiders who wandered into their territory. Their hive remained sealed, the bees inside slowly dying out. Deepness became even more dangerous, filled with infected creatures and horrible monsters. The spiders there continued to hunt, but the infection twisted many of them into new terrifying forms. The kingdom became a graveyard. Most bugs were dead or infected. The few survivors hid in safe places or tried to escape to the surface. A small town called Dirtmouth, at the very top of Hallow Nest near the surface, became one of the last refugees. The bugs there were some of the only ones left with their minds intact, but they were trapped, unable to leave because of the infection below, watching their world die. Deep in the temple of the Black Egg, the Hollow Knight hung from its chains, suffering. The radiance was slowly breaking free from inside it. The Hollow Knight's shell cracked, and infection leaked out, dripping onto the floor. The Hollow Knight couldn't even die. It was trapped in endless agony, trying and failing to contain a god while its body literally broke apart. And it could make no sound to express its suffering because vessels have no voice. This is where our story really begins, with the arrival of a small vessel who would change everything. This vessel was one of the ones who had escaped the abyss long ago, before the Pale King sealed it. This little vessel, the one we control in the game, had wandered far from Hallownest, so far that it even forgot why it existed. But something called it back. Maybe it was the Hollow Knight, crying out through the dream realm. Maybe it was the Radiance herself, sensing another potential vessel. Or maybe it was just fate. Whatever the reason, this small vessel returned to Hallownest and entered the kingdom through Dirtmouth. This little vessel, which players usually call the Knight, begins exploring the ruins of Hallownest. It travels through the forgotten crossroads, now swarming with infected bugs. It visits Greenpath and fights past the Mosskin. It descends into the fungal wastes and encounters the mushroom creatures. The Knight is drawn deeper and deeper into the kingdom, following paths and finding old artifacts. It acquires a nail and learns to fight. It finds charms that give it special abilities. It grows stronger as it explores. Early in its journey, the Knight encounters Hornet. She appears in Greenpath, this mysterious figure in red who watches the Knight from a distance. Hornet is unique in Hallownest. Unlike the vessels, she has a gender, a voice, and a will of her own. She's fast and skilled, wielding a needle and thread as weapons. When she finally confronts the Knight, she tests it in combat, wanting to see if this small vessel is strong enough for what's coming. The Knight defeats her, or at least proves its worth, and Hornet lets it pass. She calls the Knight Ghost, and seems to know more about what's happening than anyone else. The Knight's exploration leads it to discover the truth about the Dreamers. To reach the temple of the Black Egg and confront the Hollow Knight, the Knight needs to break the seal. That means the Dreamers have to die, their eternal sleep ending. The Knight acquires a special weapon called the Dream Nail, a blade that can cut through the barrier between dreams and reality. With this weapon, the Knight can reach the Dreamers in their sleep. One by one, the Knight hunts down the Dreamers. It climbs Lurian's tower, and Dream nails him, ending his eternal watch. It infiltrates the archives and Dream nails Monomon, though she seems to welcome her end. It descends into the depths of Deepnest, fighting through the most horrifying creatures in Hallownest, and Dream nails Hera in her den. With each Dreamer's death, one of the seals on the Temple of the Black Egg breaks. During all this exploration, the Knight can find pieces of the King's old charm. One piece is hidden in the White Palace, which exists in the Dream Realm now, protected by impossible deadly traps. The Knight has to navigate through this place, jumping over spikes and buzzsaws, making perfect movements through the most difficult platforming challenges. At the heart of the White Palace, the Knight finds the corpse of the Pale King sitting on his throne. Even in death, he holds one half of the King Soul. The Knight takes it. The other half is with the White Lady. When the Knight visits her in the Queen's gardens, she recognizes what it is. She calls it Ghost, just like Hornet does, and she gives it her piece of the King Soul. She seems sad, but also hopeful. She tells the Knight to seek the place where it was born, to find what's at the heart of the King Soul. With a complete king soul, the knight can return to the abyss. The way is difficult. The knight has to acquire the king's brand from inside the worm's shell in Kingdom's Edge, marking itself as king. With the brand, the knight can break the seal on the abyss and descend into that dark place. At the bottom, among the thousands of shells of its siblings, the knight finds the birthplace. There's a large black egg there, and when the knight strikes it with the dream nail, it sees a memory. It sees the pale king's words. No mind to think, no will to break, no voice to cry suffering, born of God and void. You are the vessel. You are the Hollow Knight. The knight understands its purpose now. It understands what it was created to be, and in that moment, the king's soul transforms. It becomes the void heart, a charm that represents the knight's union with the void, its acceptance of what it is. With the void heart, the knight is ready for what comes next. When all three dreamers are dead, the seal on the temple of the black egg breaks completely. The door opens for the first time in who knows how long. The knight enters the temple and descends to the very bottom, to the chamber where the Hollow Knight is chained. Hornet is there, waiting. She's been waiting for this moment. When the Hollow Knight appears, breaking free from its chains, Hornet tries to stop it, to give the knight a chance. She fights the Hollow Knight briefly, but she's thrown aside, trapped in some way that prevents her from helping further. She can only watch. The knight faces the Hollow Knight, its sibling, in combat. And this is where things become heartbreaking. The Hollow Knight is trying to fight, but it's also trying not to fight. It's infected, its body leaking orange fluid, its movements jerky and pained. During the battle, the Hollow Knight sometimes stops and just starts stabbing itself. It's trying to contain the radiance, trying to keep her from escaping, even as the knight fights it. The cries and screams that come from the Hollow Knight aren't its own voice, because vessels have no voice. Those sounds are the radiance screaming from inside it. What happens next depends on what the knight has prepared. There are several possible endings to this story, each revealing something different about Hallownest's fate. In the most basic ending, if the knight simply defeats the Hollow Knight, the battle ends with the Hollow Knight collapsed on the ground. The knight stands over its sibling. Then, in an act of sacrifice, the knight takes the Hollow Knight's place. Chains wrap around the knight, pulling it into the black egg. The door seals shut, and the knight becomes the new prison for the Radiance. This ending is called the Hollow Knight ending, and it just repeats the cycle. The infection stops for now, but eventually the same thing will happen again. There's another ending called the Sealed Siblings ending. If the knight has the void heart when it defeats the Hollow Knight, something different happens. Hornet breaks free and approaches. She sees what the knight is about to do. The knight takes the Hollow Knight's place in the chains, but this time Hornet seals the door from outside. She becomes a dreamer herself, using her power to strengthen the seal. The knight is trapped inside with the radiance, and Hornet guards the door. This ending might last longer than the original seal, but it's still just delaying the inevitable. Hallownest remains in ruins, and the infection is merely contained, not ended. But there's a third ending, the true ending, called Dream No More. If the knight has the void heart, and uses the dream nail on the Hollow Knight during the battle instead of finishing the fight normally, something incredible happens. The knight enters the Hollow Knight's dream, going into the dream realm where the radiance has been trapped all this time, and there, at the heart of everything, the night faces the radiance herself. The radiance is a massive moth-like being made of pure light. She's beautiful and terrifying, with brilliant white wings and glowing energy radiating from her. The battle takes place in a strange dream space, with platforms floating in an orange void. The radiance attacks with beams of light, with swords of light, with spikes that shoot up from below. It's one of the hardest battles in the game, a test of everything the player has learned. But the knight isn't alone in this fight. With the void heart, the knight has unified the void. All those siblings who died in the abyss, all those shades wandering in darkness, they're all connected now. And as the battle reaches its climax, the knight calls them. Black tendrils of void rise up from below, wrapping around the radiance. She struggles, screaming, trying to break free with her light. But the void is endless and hungry. The Hollow Knight's shade appears and tears open a wound on the radiance's face, revealing her core. The knight's shell breaks, and its shade emerges, pure void given purpose. The shade attacks the radiance directly, striking again and again at her face. The radiance shatters, breaking apart into dream essence, her light finally extinguished. The void consumes her completely, pulling her down into darkness. The ancient enemy of the void is finally destroyed. In the real world, in the Temple of the Black Egg, the Hollow Knight falls to its knees, finally free. The chains break. The Hollow Knight can finally rest. Hornet removes her mask and looks at her fallen sibling, the Knight, who sacrificed itself to kill the Radiance. The infection is gone. Hallownest can finally begin to heal. Back in the abyss, the shades of all the vessels sink back into the darkness. Finally at peace, they fulfilled their purpose, not by containing the radiance, but by destroying her. The void returns to stillness. But the story of Hollow Knight has even more to it. There's additional content that reveals other aspects of the world. In one expansion called the Grim Troop, a strange circus of bugs arrives in Dirtmouth. They're led by Troop Master Grim, a mysterious figure in red who serves the Nightmare Heart. Grim gives the knight a quest to collect flames throughout Hallow Nest, and this quest reveals that there are other kingdoms beyond Hallow Nest, other lands with their own strange magic and rituals. The Grim Troop deals with nightmares and flames and a cycle of death and rebirth that's completely separate from Hallownest's story. In another expansion called Godmaster, the knight discovers a place called Godhome, a mysterious realm where the God-Seeker exists. The God-Seeker is obsessed with gods and powerful beings. In Godhome, the knight can fight harder versions of every boss in the game, testing its skills to the absolute limit. At the end of the final challenge, the knight faces the absolute Radiance, an even more powerful version of the Radiance in the hardest fight in the entire game. If the knight wins, something happens. The knight transforms into something called Void-Given Focus, described as the god of gods by the God-Seeker. This massive being of pure void attacks and completely destroys the absolute Radiance with overwhelming power. But in doing so, the void also destroys Godhome itself. In the real world, Hornet sees the Hollow Knight freed from the Black Egg, and behind them, void leaks out, suggesting that the knight has become something beyond a mere vessel, something that could be dangerous to everything. The lore of Hollow Knight also includes many smaller stories. There's Quirrell, a traveller who arrives in Hallownest around the same time as the knight. Quirrell is looking for his master, Monomon the teacher, though he's lost his memories. As the knight explores, Quirrell appears in various locations, always sitting peacefully, observing the ruins of this kingdom. He regains his memories over time, and eventually leads the knight to the archives where Monomon sleeps. After Monomon dies, Quirrell can be found sitting by a lake in the Blue Lake area, finally at peace. His nail is left stuck in the ground nearby, suggesting he might have decided to end his journey there. There's Myla, a cheerful bug mining in the Crystal Peak. When you first meet her, she's happy and singing. But as the infection worsens, Myla becomes infected too. Her song becomes darker. Eventually she attacks the knight on sight. Her eyes glow in orange. Mine completely gone. Players often find her story one of the saddest in the game because you watch a friendly character slowly lose themselves to the infection. There's Cloth, a warrior bug who wants to be a hero. She asks the knight to let her help in battles, wanting to prove herself. If you let her help you fight the traitor lord in the Queen's Gardens, she actually dies in the battle, sacrificing herself to protect the knight. But she dies happy, finally achieving the heroic death she always wanted. There's Tizo, another warrior who goes to the Colosseum of Fools seeking glory, but he's overconfident and underprepared. If you go to the Colosseum, you can find Tizo's body, killed by the beasts there before he even made it to a proper fight. His story is a warning about pride and rushing into danger. There's the Nailsmith, a master craftsman who upgrades the knight's nail throughout the game. After he creates the pure nail, his masterpiece, he becomes depressed because he'll never make anything better. He asks the knight to kill him with his perfect creation. The knight can choose to kill him or refuse. If you refuse, the Nailsmith eventually finds new purpose and happiness, living with another bug and finding that life has more to offer than just creating weapons. There's Elderbug, the old bug in Dirtmouth who's kind to the knight. He's lonely because everyone else has left or died. As the knight returns to Dirtmouth after each adventure, Elderbug is always there, offering warm words and showing that he cares, even if he doesn't fully understand what the knight is doing. He represents the ordinary bugs of Hallow Nest, the ones who weren't heroes or warriors but just wanted to live peaceful lives. The lore also includes the history of the Abyss and the Void itself. The Void is described as an ancient force, possibly older than even the Radiants. Some bugs wondered if there were older, stranger kingdoms deep below Hallow Nest, suggesting the Void might be a remnant of something that existed long before any of the current civilizations. The Void opposes light naturally, and the conflict between the Radiants and the Vessels is really a conflict between light and darkness, dreams and emptiness, two fundamental forces that can never coexist peacefully. The Vessels themselves are tragic figures. They're children who are never allowed to be children. They were created for one purpose, to be empty enough to contain a god, and thousands of them failed and were discarded. The game makes you walk through the abyss and see all their shells, all these tiny bodies that represent the Pale King's desperation and cruelty. The White Lady calls them her greatest shame. Even the successful Hollow Knight was ultimately just a child used as a tool, a child who developed feelings for its father and was punished for that humanity by being trapped in eternal suffering. The Knight, the character we play as, is interesting because it's basically an undiscarded, failed vessel. It escaped the abyss when it wasn't supposed to. It wandered the world and came back of its own will. The Knight isn't perfect either. It can think and make choices, which means it isn't truly hollow, but maybe that's exactly what was needed. The pure vessel failed because it was taught to think and feel. The night succeeds because it chose to face the radiance, chose to sacrifice itself, chose to unite the void. Sometimes imperfection is stronger than perfection. Hornet is special because she represents something different. She's called the gendered child by the White Lady, acknowledging that unlike the vessels, Hornet has a defined gender and identity. She wasn't made to be empty. She was born from a deal between her father and Hera, a child meant to be an heir to Deepnest. But she also has loyalty to Hallownest through her father. She protects the kingdom's ruins, fighting to keep outsiders away from the Black Egg until someone worthy arrives. She tests the night multiple times, making sure it's strong enough. And in the endings where the night is sealed away, Hornet is left to guard the seal, continuing her duty even though almost everyone else is dead or gone. The Pale King himself is one of the most controversial characters in the lore. Some see him as a tragic figure who made terrible choices to save his kingdom. He gave bugs consciousness and built a civilization, which is arguably a gift. But he also committed horrific acts. He created thousands of children specifically to discard them. He chained one of his children in eternal torment. He manipulated other bugs into becoming dreamers, giving up their lives for his plan. He had an affair with Hera just to get her cooperation, and in the end, all his plans failed anyway. The kingdom fell, the infection returned, and he either died or fled rather than face the consequences of his actions. His motto, "No cost too great," sounds noble, but it really means he was willing to sacrifice anything and anyone except himself. He's a complex character, both creator and destroyer, wise king and terrible father. The story of Hollow Knight is ultimately about cycles and sacrifice, and the cost of trying to live forever. The Pale King promised eternal life for his kingdom, but nothing is truly eternal. The Radiance was forgotten, but refused to stay forgotten. The Hollow Knight was supposed to be perfect, but turned out to be flawed. Every attempt to create a permanent solution failed. What finally worked wasn't a perfect seal or a perfect vessel. It was the choice of one small vessel to face the Radiance directly, to unite with its siblings, and to end her once and for all, even at the cost of its own existence. The game leaves some questions unanswered. What exactly happened to the Pale King in his final moments? Did he know his plan would fail? Did he create more vessels after sealing the abyss, or were those earlier attempts? What will happen to Hallownest now that the infection is gone? Can the kingdom recover, or is it too far gone? What about Hornet? In the dream, no more ending, she's left alone in a dead kingdom with her sibling gone. The upcoming game, Hollow Knight. Silksong will follow her story, showing what happens after, but for now, we can only imagine. There's also the question of the knight's true nature. In the Void Heart description, it says the knight has unified the void, bringing it under their will. This suggests the knight has become more than just a vessel. It's become the heart of the void itself, a being of immense power. In the Godmaster ending, we see what that power looks like when fully unleashed, a massive creature that can destroy even the absolute radiance with ease, but that power is also shown to be dangerous, capable of destroying everything, not just enemies. The void is fundamentally a force of emptiness and consumption. Making it focused and directed is powerful, but also scary. The relationship between bugs and their gods is another important theme. The Radiance created the moths and expected eternal worship. The Pale King demanded worship in exchange for consciousness. Both were higher beings who saw themselves as above the normal bugs. But the bugs themselves had their own desires and choices. The moths chose to abandon the radiance for the Pale King. Later, when the Pale King's kingdom fell, some bugs remained loyal while others just tried to survive. Hallownest shows what happens when beings with godlike power involve themselves in mortal affairs. It rarely ends well for anyone. The game's world design reinforces its themes. Hallownest is beautiful but decaying. Elegant architecture crumbles. Gardens become overgrown. Water floods abandoned areas. Everything is falling apart, returning to nature or emptiness. The few survivors huddle in small, safe spots surrounded by danger. The music in different areas reflects this too. Dirtmouth has sad but peaceful music. The City of Tears has rain and melancholy piano. The Abyss has distorted, creepy sounds that make you feel uncomfortable. The soundtrack tells the story as much as the visuals do. Team Cherry, the developers who created Hollow Knight, built the world before writing most of the story. They designed locations and characters and then figured out how they all connected. This approach led to a world that feels organic and mysterious. You discover the lore by exploring, by reading tablets, by talking to NPCs, by paying attention to environmental details. The game never just tells you the story outright. You have to piece it together, and different players might interpret things differently. That ambiguity is intentional and makes the lore feel deeper and more interesting. The art style contributes to this too. Characters are cute but also slightly creepy. Vessels are adorable but represent horrific child sacrifice. Hornet looks cool but is actually quite sad and lonely. The Pale King is elegant and regal, but also the architect of so much suffering. Nothing in Hollow Knight is purely one thing. Everything has layers. The combat and exploration are also tied to the story. The knight grows stronger by exploring, by defeating bosses, by collecting charms and abilities. This mirrors the journey from being a weak, abandoned vessel to becoming strong enough to challenge gods. Every area cleared, every boss defeated, every secret found adds to the knight's power and understanding. By the time you face the Radiance, you've been through the entire kingdom. You've seen what the infection did. You've met the survivors. You've learned the history. You understand why this final battle matters. The endings provide closure, but also raise new questions. In the Dream No More ending, the infection is gone, but at what cost? The night is gone, absorbed into the void. The Hollow Knight is freed, but possibly dying. Hornet is alone. The kingdom is still mostly dead. It's a bittersweet victory. The immediate threat is ended, but recovery will take a long time, if it's even possible. The game doesn't give you a happy ending where everything is fixed. It gives you an ending where the cycle of suffering is finally broken, where the mistake made so long ago is finally corrected, but the scars remain. Looking back at the entire story, Hollow Knight is about the consequences of ambition and pride. The Pale King wanted to build an eternal kingdom, so he gave bugs consciousness. But consciousness means the ability to think, to dream, and through dreams, the Radiance could reach them. His solution to the infection required creating countless vessels and sacrificing them. That solution failed because he couldn't create a truly perfect being. Perfection might be impossible. The knight succeeds not because it's perfect, but because it's determined, and because it unites with its siblings rather than standing alone. The radiance wanted to be remembered and worshipped. Her pride couldn't accept being forgotten, so she forced bugs to remember her through infection, destroying their binds in the process. She turned her creations against each other, spreading madness and death. In the end, her refusal to accept being forgotten led to her complete destruction. If she had simply stayed sealed in the dream realm, she would still exist. Instead, she fought so hard to be remembered that she was annihilated. Even the minor characters reflect these themes. The Soul Master wanted immortality and destroyed himself trying to achieve it. The Collector wanted to protect grubs and ended up imprisoning them. Tiso wanted glory and died ingloriously. Mila wanted to sing and mine and lost her mind to the infection. Throughout Hallownest, you see examples of bugs whose wants and dreams led to their downfall or suffering. But there are also examples of hope. Quirrell finds peace after his long journey. Cloth dies heroically, achieving what she wanted. The nailsmith finds new meaning in life beyond his craft. Elderbug remains kind despite being lonely. Bretta, a bug you can rescue, starts writing stories and eventually moves on to new adventures. Even in a dying kingdom, there are moments of beauty and connection and meaning. The night itself is an interesting character study even though it never speaks. It's meant to be an empty vessel, but players project so much onto it. We feel sad when we see the piles of dead siblings. We feel determined when facing tough bosses. We feel satisfaction when finally beating the Radiance. The night becomes whatever we need it to be, which is ironic because it's supposed to be nothing. Maybe that's the point. By being empty, the night can be filled with purpose by the player, by the story, by the quest itself. The world of Hollow Knight extends beyond just Hallownest too. The Grim Troop comes from other kingdoms. Quirrell travelled from distant lands. Zote, the incompetent warrior you can meet, claims to come from outside. The God-Seeker came from far away, specifically seeking gods. This suggests there's a whole world out there with its own stories. Hallownest is just one kingdom that fell. There might be others that survived or others that fell even harder. The upcoming Silksong will explore Farloom, a completely different kingdom, expanding the world even more. In conclusion, the entire lore of Hollow Knight is a story about gods and bugs, about light and darkness, about parents and children, about kingdoms that rise and fall, about sacrifice and determination, about the cost of ambition and the price of memory. It's about a small, silent knight who returned to a dead kingdom and did what mighty kings and legendary warriors could not do, ending a cycle of suffering that had lasted for ages. It's about broken families as lost children and the terrible things done in the name of necessity. It's about a moth goddess who couldn't accept being forgotten, and a worm king who couldn't accept his kingdom dying. And ultimately it's about how even the smallest being can change everything, how emptiness can defeat light, how the discarded and forgotten can become saviours. The beauty of Hollow Knight's lore is that there's always more to discover, more to think about, more interpretations to consider. Every player who experiences the story takes something different from it. Some see the Pale King as a villain, others see him as a tragic hero. Some see the Radiance as a monster, others see her as a victim of betrayal. The game doesn't tell you how to feel about these characters or events. It presents the story and lets you decide. That ambiguity, that mystery, that sadness mixed with beauty, that difficulty mixed with wonder, All of it comes together to create one of the most memorable stories in gaming. Hollow Knight's lore has inspired countless discussions, theories, and fan works. People have spent hundreds of hours analysing every detail, every implication, every possibility. And when Silksong eventually releases, we'll get even more pieces of this puzzle, more story to explore, more questions to ask, and maybe, just maybe, a few answers. So that's the lore of Hollow Knight. From the transformation of a worm into the Pale King, through the rise and fall of Hallow Nest, the tragedy of the vessels and the Hollow Knight, the return of the infection, and finally to a small knight who came back to face a goddess of light and end the nightmare once and for all. It's a story that stays with you long after you've finished playing. A tale of a kingdom that tried to last forever but couldn't, and of the sacrifices made by those who never asked to be heroes. Sweet dreams and good night.